First of all, I want to congratulate the Center for hosting this event. What I particularly like is the word solutions in it, because we've been speaking for so long. My presentation, Creating a Venture Capital Model for the Region, Best Practice Approach. Just a little bit about what we do at CME. We specialize in enterprise development models, entrepreneurship education programs, SME training, and support services. Approach for this presentation. What I would do is provide a definition of venture capital, just to ensure that we're all on the same page. I'll talk a bit about the conceptual issues of venture capital financing, and then we go straight into developing the model, context and input. And by context, we're developing this model with some peculiarities given the environment in which we operate, and then what then should be the inputs to ensure that we have an effective venture capital industry. Definition. In the context of this paper, venture capital really refers to risk capital provided by, whether it is an established venture capital fund, by angel investors, or corporate entities, that is, companies, corporations providing some venture capital directly to qualifying businesses. Seed funding. It can be in the form of seed funding to early stage companies or growth funding throughout the entrepreneurial growth cycle. And the growth funding could be to the first investment in a business, or it could be where you provide seed funding initially, and for that same investee company, you provide a series of funding subsequently. What is the intent? The intent is always growth and profitability, to generate a return via an exit. And later on, we would see that some of the constraints within our own prevailing environment would be challenging in really developing the venture capital industry, particularly as this relates to the issue of exit. What then are some of the conceptual issues in financing and VC financing? We think of VC financing, very importantly, the issue of wealth creation, of value creation. A venture capitalist doesn't only bring finance, but is more than finance, and that is what makes a difference. And that is what distinguishes VC financing from traditional sources of financing. It's the hand-holding, it's the mentoring, it's the guidance, it's the involvement or support on the board of directors. That is what makes a difference, and that is one of the key issues in VC financing, value creation for the firm. Relational, it's not arm's length transaction. It's not like in debt financing where you provide the finance and move away. It's a relationship. It's about the human capital. Venture capitalists invest in good people. As one VC fund manager said, we look for bright persons with bright ideas, novel ideas, leadership skills, passion and vision to make this business a success. Institutional investors, if you're having a fund, the issue of availability of capital in that fund is important. And very often, the fund size depends on the availability of institutional funds or institutional capital. And I'm saying this because, again, we have to be mindful of the environment in which we operate. Innovation, much said about that. Product market dynamics, as we seek to develop this venture capital model. One of the things we have to bear in mind, are we going to expect to use a Silicon Valley model where we're going to have breakthrough technologies? And if so, what then are the factors to bring us there? Or do we then have to continue with some of, maybe further down the scale, where it's an existing company, but perhaps because of some innovation in the process, we believe it is significant enough to qualify for VC funding. Growth, very important, the growth factor. Venture capitalists invest in a company with the potential for growth, significant growth. Growth is the basis upon which they get the returns and to get I should say, a very good exit. Partnerships, relationships. Remember I spoke about the hand-holding, and VCs bring in much more than funds. The partnerships, the access to networks. R&D, much said about that, the role of R&D, because that is tied to innovation. Information, access to information. market intelligence included there, the role of technology, the policy framework, the legal and regulatory framework, the financial market in terms of its structure, in terms of its architecture, particularly the capital market and the availability of exit opportunities, and, as I said, exit. So that's it. So what then is the context within which we're trying to develop this model? Let's look at our environment. And here I'm talking about the environment. At the investor level, generally risk-averse, limited information, limited knowledge of VC financing, and you're talking about investors who you're perhaps asking to pool resources into a VC fund. And then I say weak supporting infrastructure, and these weaknesses stem from not an absence, but perhaps not as integrated as we'd like to see. For the venture capital companies, some of the same factors apply, except that you're talking here about some limited technical skills in terms of the ability to manage the fund and to structure the fund to get the success you're looking for. Very often, they're not open to syndication and really financing deals with another venture capital company. And again, the less than integrated infrastructure. At the entrepreneur level, which is at the level of the firm, there is a general reluctance to dilute ownership by many Caribbean businesses. And we see as well, while this is changing in terms of the managerial capacity, in that I think a number of SMEs now have family members who are highly educated, have a vision and so on. You still have that in some parts. Then weaknesses in governance. Governance is key because without the governance structure, a venture capitalist investing in a company may run the risk of not realizing the return on the investment. Local outlook, not looking at the big picture, the true potential of the business, as opposed to making enough money and feeling a measure of comfort. And then weak infrastructure, as I said to before. Within the environment, and there are other factors, the linkages between state, academia, private sector, perhaps not sufficiently coordinated, although I must say steps are being made in that regard. The capital market not conducive to exits via an IPO, and state participation has not been really effective, even though you have situations where incentives and fiscal incentives would have been provided. Limited pre-money support for entrepreneurs, and that is really bringing the entrepreneur to the level where he can access funding. And the value-added functions by VCC is limited. Going back again to the point, VC is supposed to bring more than financial capital. Let's look at this diagram, and it's just to illustrate a point, and based on information years ago with a particular venture capital fund, and I think it applies in most of the countries as well. The area in red, investments, meaning investments made, the green, value of funds raised, and the area above it, the lighter color, current demand. Now, you look at current demand and you say, wow, have some good businesses out there in terms of the potential, and therefore all we need to do is perhaps increase the number of funds raised, the size of the venture capital fund, and we're going to get some success stories. Well, there's a difference between current demand and real demand. So that if we do some sifting out perhaps, we would see that current demand shifting downwards and perhaps coming nearer to a position like this area here. In that, what you found that anybody who perhaps did not get funding, thank you so much, yes, came to the venture capital fund, didn't meet the criteria, but it was included as part of demand. Well, it's not really the real demand. So you adjust and you see the real demand there. But one may ask the question, what then do we do? Hey, seems like my hand is doing this better. Okay. What do we do with this area here? The area to the top. Okay, the area where we have the arrow, meaning after we do the sifting out. And this is where the pre-support services are important in terms of the support to bring you to the level that you can then approach the venture capital company.
Your finger pad that just touched the mouse.
Okay, good, thanks. So I think, if I may just go back here to make the point. No. All right. So I think the issue of VC funding is really one of supply and demand, because in this diagram you see as well, funds raised, look at the proportion of funds raised relative to investments made. One may think that if there's this great demand, at least most of the capital should have been utilized. That did not happen. And then I talk about the issue of real demand and current demand. So the state of venture capital industry now and in the future, I believe, is based on microeconomic principles of demand and supply, and of course, macro, if we're looking at the macroeconomy. And these are the factors that we must address in any attempt to create a model for the region. Creating a model. You could create a model in which you believe the stimulant is an increase in institutional and private capital. But we must know, as the diagram illustrated, you can have funds. If the funds not flowing into the right places, you do not get success stories. And you saw that in the past. We had a number of venture capital companies in the Caribbean, but where did the money go? It went channeled into SMEs. So in fact, a smaller percentage was invested than what was raised. So there was even liquidity at the level of the fund and not being channeled to businesses. You can create a model which focuses on participation of a wider stakeholder group, and I'll touch on one of those models in a bit. But what this second model does is recognize that it's not just about capital. It's about the whole framework. It's about the enabling environment. It's about wider participation in order to get the results you're looking for. So let's talk about some models, framework, as you want to call them. I'd look at 3, given I have 15 minutes only. So this is, it was used, or I should say is used in Nigeria as a means of mobilizing capital for venture capital, for SME financing. And this, the next 2 slides, this and the other one is courtesy my colleague who I met recently in South Africa at the International Small Business Congress event. What they did in Nigeria is that the banks agreed to set aside 10% of profit after tax annually for 5 years for equity investments in SMEs. The central bank was appointed to act as secretariat, and the banks agreed that non-invested set-aside funds be withdrawn by the central bank as a penalty. So that's a push factor to ensure that the investment does take place. And then the withdrawn funds was used to run the secretariat. So what this model did was getting even commercial banks involved in the process, even though people believe that commercial banks are averse to, venture capital funding, venture capital financing. Now, I must say, I would commend one local bank who I see recently put aside some funds for SME financing. I think that's a step in the right direction. You could use a corporate model. What is the corporate model? Well, I should say corporate venture capital. This is where a larger, more established company invests resources directly in a smaller company, and it's usually for strategic purposes. It usually occurs where the product, market, or technology is related to the investing company's operations, or where the investee provides a business opportunity. Corporate venturing can be an invaluable tool for keeping pace with industry development and in fostering innovation. Now, we keep hearing about a lot of our businesses not being able to penetrate the international market. I believe that if we see more corporate venture taking place, where we engage some of the more established companies, and they provide funding to a smaller company that they can leverage, you not only provide the opportunity to access the market, but you also provide the resources, you provide the contacts, you provide the networks, as reflected in this diagram here. So you get all these coming with a corporate venture model. Customers. The small company may not have the financial or the know-how to access the international market. Corporate venturing provides a great opportunity. There may be a little downside in that there may be restrictions according to what the larger company wants you to do in terms of which markets to access, or they may have some influence in terms of the product definition, or but it's good. The benefits outweigh the cons. Now, the other model I want to talk about, you remember I said you could have a model that has greater stakeholder participation. This is a model that I had recommended when I wore another hat in the local venture capital industry. In this model, what you see here is at the top, government and institutional investors channeling funds into, at that time I said Trinidad and Tobago, but it can be used in any country. It can even be used at a regional level. So let's say into a regional private equity corporation. All right? You now have individual investors also being given the opportunity to invest in that fund. You have institutional investors investing in that fund as well. So you see there are wide sources of capital, and this is important because in the context of the Caribbean, and given what is happening even with developmental organizations, I don't know how much of that money would be now available to us. And we got a lot of money previously from the international organizations. So this model even allows for something like what we call crowdsourcing now, where you put whatever you can, and that could contribute towards increasing the size of the fund. Now, where will the money go? You can set up a community private equity fund. I'm bringing a social issue into the equation. Social does not mean that it cannot be economically viable. What it says is that we recognize the importance of addressing social issues while we treat with economic issues. The Caribbean is plagued with crime and unrest and all these issues. What are we going to do about it? And then you have the normal private equity fund in the middle, where that would go into established VCCs who can then take the regular approach and identify businesses that they see necessary. And then you can have a fund that go directly now to directly into businesses. So you see, this model now allows for a large number of players to be involved in the VC process. So what I did, I showed 3 situations. There is no one model applicable to the region. Several models can coexist, all tailored to meet the needs of the investor and the entrepreneurial firm. Whatever the model, there should be a win-win scenario: growth and profitability for the firm, and an acceptable ROI for the venture capitalists, commensurate with the risk taken. If you're creating a model, ensure you have an adequate supply of funds. And that is why we have to look at different ways to attract capital into the funds and engage wider groups, as opposed to going to whether, I don't want to call any international agency or going to the same place. It's not going to happen. We have to find creative ways to raise capital. Fund structure and management. The success of a fund depends on how the fund is structured and the managerial expertise, whether it's going to be an open fund or a closed fund. Whether it is in terms of, in the context of the Caribbean, a fund to invest across the region, a fund with limitations for a respective country where it's already so small, and therefore what happens is that the fund cannot make investments because the size of the market is so small, it can't get the type of deals coming forward. While I say that, though, and we talk about type of deals, let us not try to develop a model where we're looking for a Silicon Valley type deal in a Caribbean environment. And we have to be mindful of that because we'll end up sitting on the funds. Market information, very important. And you need market information for valuations. Even before making an investment, a venture capitalist wouldn't know how to value the company. And this market intelligence that I know somebody mentioned yesterday, very important. How are you going to value that company? The issue of valuation. Market information at the exit, market information while you're doing the due diligence process. You need individual and institutional capacity, and of course the enabling environment and the supporting infrastructure. We must utilize technology in the VC process, and you utilize technology at all levels: information, education, networking, fund formation, deal generation. So in the way forward, I think we need to see this issue of venture capital as part of a larger socio-economic and political system. And as I think Indira said, for the academics in the house, so that you would know I did some research, I do some quote here, Dasani and Kenny 2001. Create a financial market structure and an architecture conducive to VC activity. Venture capital thrives best when you have a mix of financing in the system, because an entrepreneur needs a mix of financing. So it's not one or the other. The financing and the mix of financing would vary along the entrepreneurial growth path. Ensure correlation between entrepreneurship, legal and policy framework, education system, and supporting institutions. I trust that I have stimulated your minds such that you feel inclined to review the existing relationship between regional VC strategy and outcomes, as well as the determination and the relevance of the development of the VC industry in bringing novel products and creating globally competitive firms. One thing though, perhaps, just perhaps, we may do well to channel our resources in addressing the issue of competitiveness at root, rather than channeling funds to routine products. By root, I mean the education system, so that in the future, after a process of integrating science and math in business, we can create a cadre of innovative, smart, highly intelligent persons capable of developing some of the breakthrough technologies and products that we see in other jurisdictions coming from. Thank you for your time and your attention.